Hello everyone. I want to talk about the third exam and some things you can do to prepare for it. This exam will be quite different from the first two, so please watch this video to know what to expect. For the logistics on this exam in terms of what you will be provided with, there are definitely some differences here from the first two exams. Of course, you'll be given a periodic table. You'll always be provided with that. You will also be provided with some um, constants that are important. So the two here are c, which is the speed of light. You'll be provided that information, and h, which is Planck's constant, which is also something you might use. Any other constants, anything else in terms of a number that you might need could be provided, but expect to have those two in particular. What is different here is that you will not be allowed to have a note card. So on the first two exams, you did have a note card. On this one, you will not. And again, the reason for that is because you're looking at concepts here more so than calculations. There will be some calculations, but the focus here should be on understanding some of these ideas, and having a deep understanding of that is why it's necessary to not have a note card. Some of this will also be reviewed from the first exam, which is information which by this point I would expect you to know without a note card. There will be some potential for some minor calculations. When I say minor, what I mean there is a small percent of the exam will also involve calculations. So do be prepared by bringing a calculator. However, that percent will be much smaller in comparison to the first two exams. The logistics here in terms of the timing will be somewhat similar to what we've seen before, in that you will have a 90-minute period of time for completing the exam. And after that time, the rest of the time we will have together in the lab, we'll be doing another project. In this case, it will be the discussion of your presentations. So this will be the first time we spend time together talking about this. So there is something you will need to do in preparation, which is select a presentation topic that you would like to do your presentation on. There is a poll on Canvas where you can select from a few options. Make sure to watch the video where it goes over those options and why you might want to choose one over another. And then pick one if you haven't done so yet. If you don't do this, then you may be assigned to a topic that you are not as interested in. We will be working in groups during this time, and the way that will work is people that have chosen the same topic will be grouped together, and in those groups you will start working on how you want to go about doing the presentation and having some discussions on that. So I would recommend being ready for that conversation. If you get done a little bit early, you can even go and do that preparation, but don't necessarily plan on having that time. So this is how we will be using the time on the day of the exam. You will have some practice exams, or I should say a practice exam available. So I wanted to say a few things about that. So similar to the previous practice exams, we won't have the multiple choice options that were on what are now the practice exams. But many of the other questions could be structured in a similar way to questions you will see on the practice exam. There may be questions that are a little bit different than the practice exam, where you are going to be doing some describing. So you might need to be writing some sentences about explaining things, which I don't think came up quite as much on these practice exams. So make sure that's something you would feel comfortable doing. Part of the reason for that kind of that additional aspect is because we're not covering as much information on this exam as were covered on what were those practice exams. So there's additional details of quantum mechanics that will not be on your exam. So if you see letters that we haven't talked about yet in the class, those are probably related to quantum mechanics. So you can disregard those types of questions. Also, we did talk about molecular orbital diagrams, so I should say molecular orbitals. So there is some knowledge of that you would need. However, in terms of solving a molecular orbital diagram, that is not the level of detail we got to there. So there are questions about that as well. And then I have the bullet point here for this, but there are some things that we will talk about in more detail in the next module. So just be aware of those things. Again, the best way to use the practice exam is by treating it as an exam and going through and taking it, again, with no notes this time. And then if there are areas that you find problematic, go back and study those to complete your preparation for the exam. In general, what I would recommend here is make sure you've done all the worksheets and quizzes. Once you feel comfortable with those, go on to the practice exam. If you did need to do a homework assignment, or if you felt that you wanted to do some extra homework for practice, you can look at that. But again, sometimes those are going to be a little bit more challenging than what you see on the exam. In this case, I think for exam 3, it will probably be not quite as different as you might have seen for the first 2 exams in terms of the differentiation between homework and exam questions. For the weighting of the exam, so we had Module 7 and 8 were kind of grouped together, and then there was Module 6. So Module 6 will be about 35%. Module 7 and 8 will be about 55%. And then, again, there's some nomenclature review that you will need to know, and that will be about 8% of the exam. And when I look at this, it adds up to not quite 100%, but I have those abouts in there. So hopefully you can get the general sense of that. And then, again, with the nomenclature aspect, I mentioned that you would need to know some polyatomic ions. They are listed here. So any polyatomic ion that would show up as something you needed to know on this exam is on this PowerPoint. So just take a look at those. The ones that are in yellow may be a little bit more likely than the other ones, but actually any of the ones on here could show up. What you also want to be aware of is the way to relate, so the ATE ending to the ITE ending, and then perhaps the hypo and per might show up in a few cases. So make sure you feel comfortable with these. Again, the olive nomenclature is about 8% of the exam. So that's a relatively small amount, and that includes it's not just going to be name the polyatomic ions, but putting them into ionic compounds. So make sure you feel comfortable with that, and you do spend a little bit of time basically memorizing some of these. I wanted to de-emphasize memorization early on in the semester, as that's not the best way to approach learning these things. But now that we've had a little bit of time working with some of these, there are some that are important enough that you do need to know them, and that's partly related to being able to identify chemicals in the lab. Okay, to wrap things up, just a reminder of the things you can do to be preparing for the exam. Make sure you've done any worksheets. If you haven't done those already, those are, again, the ones on Canvas. Complete any homework if you would either like to improve your quiz scores or you feel like you need more practice in a certain area. Then take the practice exam and refine your study as necessary based on how you felt about how you did on that practice exam. Feel free at any point to ask questions about any of these things on the discussion board. And then, very important, the night before the exam, get a good night's sleep and eat a good breakfast so that your brain has the health and the energy it needs to do well. Good luck, everyone. I look forward to seeing you at the exam.